Season 2 of Star Trek Strange New Worlds was just as successful as Season 1 and was probably the most consistent in quality from start to finish in recent Star Trek history. But how did I rank the 10 episodes? Find out now on Cine Nerd Presents Blur Trek. Welcome and greetings, nerds and fellow Trekkers. This is Will, host of Cine Nerd Presents Blur Trek and co-host and producer of the Cine Nerd podcast with our host, Sarah Belmont. Thank you for joining me today as I'm going to be diving into Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 2 as I rank each and every episode from this past season. Now that we've had all 10 episodes in the books and we were over a week past the season finale, I've had some space to reflect on the season as a whole. There will be some spoilers, so if you haven't watched a particular episode on my list, jump to the next one on my list so that you don't miss any important plot points that I might discuss in this ranking of the season. So overall, thoughts on this season is that it was a very strong one, and I have to say, probably one of the best in the new Trek era, and I would say in the franchise as a whole, with incredible character development, filling in gaps of backstory for our legacy characters like Spock and Uhura to explain why and how they are the persons we meet in the TOS era, and it also has solid high concept storylines. And that Star Trek Strange New Worlds really did keep fans on the edge of their seats all throughout the season. The season really had a strong start to finish and had multiple genres, including the procedural courtroom drama, horror, comedy, PTSD and trauma stories dealing with the conflict of war, time travel, and week in and week out, it was a consistent show where I never felt like I wish I had gotten that hour of my life back. So, when you have such a strong season, it's hard to say which one was the worst or best, but there are definitely ones that do stand out, whether they're taking big swings creatively or storytelling wise. I will start, in my opinion, the weakest episode to the strongest. Let me know what your list is in the comments below, and be sure to like and subscribe to our channel to never miss any episodes. So before I start with my rundown of the listed episodes, be sure to, if you've missed any of my reviews in the past, hit the playlist as it comes up here on the top here. The link to Blur Trek. It has all my reviews of all the episodes of Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 2, as well as some for Star Trek Picard as well. So check that out. And I will now move to my list, which starting at number 10 is episode 2-1, The Broken Circle. So I had much anticipation for the return of season 2. And while this episode was okay, it was in the grand context of the season a very pedestrian return for Star Trek Strange New Worlds, where we had both big, creative, and character swings that were taking place in this series. I will say it does do a good job of setting up several things, including Spock's diplomacy with the Klingons, of course, with the drinking the blood wine. That saw that later in this season, but also later on the Star Trek timeline in the Undiscovered Country. We also get more context as far as Mbinga and Chapel's service together, and really setting up an episode later in the season as far as the PTSD that both of them had suffered from the trauma and during the Klingon conflict, but also learning about Mbinga and developing the adrenaline drug that is used to help amp up performance enhancing as far as your combat skills, etc. So it was a good start to the season, but in the grand scheme of things, I think for me it was definitely the should fall at number 10. Moving to number 9 is episode 2-4, Among the Lotus Eaters, and I felt that this episode had potential to be very memorable, but I felt, especially given that I was revisiting the events we saw in The Cage, which was the original pilot on Rigel, but it was touched on in that episode, and we returned to that planet. But I felt that it ultimately faltered in the last act, where the mind-altering impacts of the planet ended while Pike was in the castle, just as the moment he was about to take out Zach Wynn. And I just felt that was a very plot convenience to instead of a moment where he did it himself. It was just like, oh, the effects of the planet just kind of wore off because he had the protections from the castle, and it wasn't anything internally that he did. So I thought that this really took the tension and drama and the moral choices and things that really could have been very fascinating out the window. And so that's why I put this episode at number 9. Moving to episode 8 in my list is episode 210, Genemy, which was the season finale. And I will say this was the episode that had our sci-fi horror monster of the week. Worked really well in the sense that it definitely heightened the Gorn threat, and it really felt real, like it did with some of the events we saw in SS3 in the original series and the episode Arena. But I really did a solid job of setting up things for the 3rd season. Where I will say it faltered for me, at least, was with the cliffhanger, is that I saw where they were trying to give us a best of both worlds moment, but I don't feel like the story really got us there. It did in some regards, but I think the bigger punch wasn't anything that the story did. It's more just real world things that we're dealing with now with the writer's strike and the actor's strike, and just knowing that it's going to be some time before they get back into production, because we don't know when either of those events are going to end, and especially knowing that season 3 was about to start filming right when the writer's strike started. So I think that adds more to the anticipation looking forward to the 3rd season than what the story did in and of itself. I will say things that did work very well in this episode was the organic reintroduction of Scotty in a way that made sense for him to be there. Wasn't just let's just add another legacy character for legacy character's sake. It was engineered Scott way, even though he's young, it's very consistent with what we know with his character and how he will grow into the saving the day Scotty that we see in the original series and beyond. So that was one of the things that I thought was really good about the episode. One thing that came to me after I watched it, and as I was putting together this review, is having done a rewatch of The Cage and the Menagerie, which is an episode in the original series where we see what happens to Chris Pike after his injuries, and is his choice as far as in the Menagerie. Just if you haven't watched the episode, spoiler ahead, but he makes a decision to go with someone that he met in who we saw in the original pilot. Her name is Vina, in that episode where the Telosians gave him a choice. And one of the things I hope we get in resolution and understanding why he makes that decision in the original series is what happens with his relationship with Battelle, and maybe it's again foreshadowing that she is going to probably not make it, and maybe he's just so devastated by that loss that instead of whenever he has a choice down the road, maybe it's just too heartbreaking for him to go with her again, whereas with Vina maybe it's a little bit light. But I just hope they really pick up on that choice that he makes down the road here in Strange New Worlds. So moving on, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below on that. Moving on to episode 7, which is on my list, is episode 2-3 of season 2, Tomorrow, Tomorrow, and Tomorrow. This was the alternate universe episode where I personally felt like I really did fully embrace La'an as a member of the cast and the show and the crew. Christina Chong did an amazing job with this episode, and especially her meeting the alternate timeline Kirk and falling in love, her being freed from the weight of her lineage, because that's just been a cloud over her all throughout the series, and her then not making the choices of not killing Khan, especially when she knows the consequences or what's going to happen in her Prime universe. And so I think that was really something that this was a very, very powerful episode. And, depending on if you come to me 6 months from now, I may have it up higher on my list, quite frankly, because it was such a very, very powerful episode for Lon as a character, and the performance by Christina Chong in particular helps carry that. For where it does falter for me, though, is that for not that I'm being canon police or whatever, but for folks who are or have issues with these types of things, it definitely muddled the issue of when the eugenics wars actually takes place, because it seems that they've adjusted it again on the timeline due to the episode events in this episode. So if you're a stickler for those kind of things, it probably leaves you more frustrated than helps. But that was something that I thought with that episode, and also question that it leaves with me. Not that it's a bad thing, but or a good thing, but just a very interesting point is, she left that gun that she had there in the institute. Did that sort of kick things off with something happening there at the Noonien Singh Institute, where things progress to Khan and the other augments taking up the path that we know, which leads to the eugenics war. So that was one of the things that I did questions that were stuff left hanging there from this episode. Moving to the sixth best episode. Episode 26, Lost in Translation. And this has many things going on in this episode. It's definitely a Uhura-centric episode, which I thought was a really going more into her background and her coming to grips with losing Hemmer and her place in Starfleet. Of course, it was also very big in this episode that we finally see Prime Timeline Kirk, Lieutenant Kirk, James T. Kirk, Sam Kirk. But we do get the good interplay between the two Kirk brothers, Sam and Jim, as far as their sibling rivalries. We get some great foreshadowing with Kirk, Spock, and Uhura meeting there at the end of the episode as far as what comes. And also great character development for Uhura as far as being an integral member of the crew, and Captain Pike having full confidence in her when at the end of the episode, when they were in the nebula, her proposing a solution and he follows it. So great episode for Uhura. Great episode for learning more about Kirk. And also I thought that was a very sixth best episode for where I put it on my list. Moving to episode 5 on my list of again, not the strongest to the strongest, is episode 25, Charades. And here is where I really fully appreciate Ethan Peck's Spock. And this is really the first time we've seen a full human Spock, because in the past we've had elements of the Vulcan training and presence being, removed from Spock, but he still physically was a Vulcan. Here he was physically human, and all the fun things that come from that. But the real thing that really stuck with me with this episode is how Spock really learns what his mother, Amanda Grayson, had to deal with in living with the Vulcans, and having him fully appreciating the things and the choices that she had to make and doing so. So that was really the big takeaway for me for that episode. Another thing is we do finally get over the hump of will they or won't they with Spock and Chapel as far as their relationship. And I think the episode did a good job with T'Pring's parents, where it could easily have gone down a very tropey way. I think between the direction and all, it had its moments there, but they managed to pull it back so it wasn't so off-putting that I probably would have lowered this episode on my list if that had gone there. So really enjoyed Charades, and really felt like this is where Ethan Peck for me was fully embracing him as Spock, and really coloring so many things post Charades as far as what we see with the character and the original series and beyond. This episode really contextualizes that much more, because he had this experience in episode 25. Moving to episode 24th on my list is episode 28, Under the Cloak of War. This was a episode following up on the Klingon conflict and the consequences of war and trauma, PTSD. I know some fans, it was a head twister because it was stuck in between the crossover and the musical, which may have been so much for some fans, but didn't bother me because I felt it was such a well written and well directed episode, and it really did a deep dive into issues of PTSD, mental health, and also the episode stays with you because of the questions that it has from the ending of what transpired with Mbenga and the Klingon general at the end of the episode, and the directing choices of not showing what happened. To me, is a strength of the episode because it allows the viewer to interpret what happened, and that episode stays with you because of that. Instead of telling us what happened, they leave it there. We see Chapel's response, but you can read that any kind of way. So I think that's why this episode for me is such ranked so high on my list for season 2. So love to hear your thoughts on that as we move forward. Any list for season 2 you're going to have the two of these episodes are going to be at the tops of just about everyone's, and even though I try not to be prisoner of the moment, I have to put this episode 2-7 those little scientists in my top 3 because it, what could have truly been a gimmick, it truly was an enjoyable episode, and I think the big takeaway for me of that episode was a great lesson on what can happen when you meet your heroes, and so it's a completely rewatchable episode. The blend between the tones of Lower Decks and Strange New Worlds all really worked very seamlessly there, and it really was a great follow-up on many of the things that we have dealt with all season long, uh, and Boimler helping the members of the crew, come to grips with some of those things. I mean, like Chapel and Spock, Lon and Kirk. When Beckett Mariner shows up, and we have the crew of the Enterprise look at their heroes as far as the crew of the NX Enterprise with Captain Archer. So everything about it just pulls so many parts of Star Trek together, and it's really hard to pick out any major flaws from this episode because it had so many great things to it. So it definitely falls on number 3 on my list. Moving to episode 2 on my list is episode 2 ad Astra per Aspera. And this is the courtroom drama, and really captures the best, I think, of Star Trek storytelling with identifying prejudices. As I noted before, those old scientists shows some of the legacy and fallout from that episode, where we see where Una story ends by the 24th century, and we see the seeds of that with the threading of the needle that Starfleet did to allow Una to continue to serve, but not completely removing their regulations on augments serving in Starfleet, and the larger issues of genetic modification and civil rights and civil liberties in the 24th century. And it was a great allegory to a lot of the issues that we are dealing with today with various civil rights and civil and social justice issues and civil justice issues in the space of LGBTQ rights, and continuing issues that we have with just general racial civil rights with some of the decisions with affirmative action and the Supreme Court and other things like that, where it shows that even in the future where we have a utopia like we have with the Federation, that they still grapple with those issues, and again, in great Star Trek, they help you as a viewer identify those issues and not necessarily tell you what to think, but gives you the tools to really evaluate some of the things that are going on, and which any good science fiction or good storytelling does, evaluate the issues that are going on in the present time, and uses this medium as a way to help you explore and question the things that are going on in your present day. So this is why that episode was landed at number 2 on my list as far as episodes that stick with you, and it continues to stick with me today. I keep definitely one that I even share with a friend who's a law professor, as far as like, hey, this might be a good episode for you to show for your class, as far as some of the courtroom drama and building arguments and that kind of thing. Because I had so many great things about it, and as a lawyer, I appreciate that as well. So moving to episode 1 on my list is episode 29, Subspace Rhapsody, the musical. And this was creatively, storytelling wise, probably the biggest swing they took this season. And for me, especially getting past being prisoner in the moment, it really is just an amazing episode for so many reasons. I think it definitely pulls together all the highlights that I've talked about with all these episodes have been character development. This episode had tons of character development, sometimes expressed through song, but also even with the exposition in between each musical number. It just really gave, just from a visual standpoint, from a production standpoint, it was just a very, very well put together episode, and where I think it could have easily have gone off the rails and be just a hot mess. This episode was not, and I think if the season had ended with this being the season finale, I would have totally been very, very fine with that. But really felt that for me, this episode that these 3 episodes that I have as far as my top 3 are ones that when we do a grand review of Strange New Worlds, when it hopefully goes up to the period of the original series, this will be one that will always stand out, and not only in Star Trek, but also I think in television history as well. So that is my list of the least strongest to most strongest episodes of Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 2. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. With that, just wanted to thank you again for joining me on this latest episode of Cine Nerd Presents Blur Trek. I just want to remind that this review content is for informational and entertainment purposes only, and is not a promotion nor promotional material for any other parties. Stand fully in full solidarity with SAG-AFTRA and the Writers Guild of America in trying to get a fair contract for their work. And with that, I'll be back with another Cine Nerd Blur Trek episode to catch up on some of the news for the week, and also maybe do a summary of Lower Deck Season 3 to prepare for the upcoming start of Season 4, which will be currently scheduled to premiere on September the 7th. We will be back this week as far as the full crew of Cine Nerd. We'll be going over to the Star Wars universe, as well as talking Blue Beetle. And please follow our crew at Twitter or X at Cine Nerd and at SNN Blur Trek. Friend us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram and Threads at scene_n_nerd, and at our website at www.scenenerdpodcast.com. Our main show drops every Friday, and please be sure to rate, follow, comment on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, subscribe to us on YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast. Live long and prosper.